Hello, and now we're looking at part 2 of social class and social stratification in Canada. This is a little under little of the under discussed area for Canada, as we will that we think that everybody does well, and so we generally say that we're happily middle class. However, statistically, there's a distinction of class structure in Canada, and we're going to look at the two models. One's based on Weber and his approach, and the other is a Marxian approach. So we'll begin with the Weber model, and his model is one of class position is based on three elements: education, occupation of the family head, whether that be the husband or the wife, and family income. Using these three criteria, class structure in Canada is divided into six classes: the upper class, the upper middle class, the middle class or lower middle class. Then there's a working class, the working poor, and the underclass. That's the six structures. Now, how do the Weberans how do the Weber supporters describe each of these structures of social class? Well, let's look at them individually. The upper class, this is the wealthiest and the most powerful class. They own substantial income producing assets. About 1% of Canadians fall within this group. It's a small number of these individuals, about 1,000 in the upper class, yield enormous amount of power. Then there's the upper middle class. These are highly educated professionals or derive their income from family-owned businesses. A combination of university education, authority and independence on the job, and high income qualifies people for this class. This is a class that is most influenced by education. Now, the middle class, or the lower middle class, traditionally most middle class positions have been relatively secure and enabled advancements. But today, four factors have diminished the chances of material success for members of this class. We have escalating housing costs. And if you've been paying attention to the news, you've been hearing how they've been upping and downing, and that makes it difficult. Stable is something that's more plannable. So escalating housing costs is one of the reasons that this diminished area for the upper middle class. Occupational insecurity, the loss of jobs or the change of jobs in the way the new market has moved. Blocked upward mobility, people not moving or retiring, so they're staying and therefore there's not room to move. And the cost of living squeeze are all influencing this upper middle class, or the lower or the upper middle class, yes. The third group, the working class. About 30% of Canadian population is in the working class. The core of this class is made up of semi-skilled machine operators as well as some workers in the service sector. Within this group, there are what is known as pink-collar occupations, which are relatively low-paying jobs. They're non-manual, semi-skilled jobs mostly held by women. This includes daycare, checkout clerks, cashiers, and waitresses as examples. Working class families earn less than middle class families and have less financial security. Then we have the group of the working poor. The working poor account for about 20% of the Canadian population. They live just above the poverty level. Unskilled work, seasonal jobs, low-paying factory and service jobs. Groups who are underrepresented in this class are employed single mothers with children, members of some visible minority groups, Indigenous people, recent immigrants are also overrepresented among the working poor. And then there's the last group, the underclass. Very poor, seldom employed, caught in long-term deprivation that results from low levels of education, income, and high rates of unemployment. About 5% of the population. Some are unable to work because of racial or ethnic discrimination, age, or disability. Single mothers are overrepresented in this category. Now we're going to move into the Marxian model, where Eric Olin Wright is one of the leading theorists following the Marx approach. And in his view, there are 4 criteria for placement in the class structure: ownership of the means of production, the capitalist class; purchase of labor of others, that's the managerial class; control of the labor of others, that's small business class; and sale of one's own labor, that's the working class. Now let's look at these 4 groups. The capital class, according to Wright, the capitalist class holds most of the wealth and power in society through ownership of capital. Sources of income are profits, interest, and very high salaries. They make major decisions about the workplace. The managerial class, which is the second group, people in the managerial class do not own the capital but have substantial control over the means of production. They are upper-level managers, supervisors, and professionals. They may influence the organization of work and the treatment of other workers. Small business class, the third group, this class consists of small business owners and craftspeople who may hire a few employees but largely do their own work. Some of these professionals now share attributes with members of the capitalist class. It's the small business class that we find many people's hopes of achieving upward mobility. And then there's the working class. The working class is made up of a number of subgroups, 2 of which are the blue-collar workers. This includes highly skilled and highly paid to low-skilled and low-paid electricians, plumbers, carpenters, to janitors and gardeners. And the second group in this category are white-collar workers, which include administrative assistants, clerical workers, sales staff. They take orders, but they don't give orders. The working class consists of about half of all employees in Canada. So we can see within some of these structures there are those that have and have lots, and there's those that have very little. And so for those, the consequences of this inequity, income and wealth, are strictly related to our individual life chances. Persons with high income or substantial wealth have more control over their lives. Persons with less income, especially those living in poverty, must spend their limited resources on the basic necessities of life. Physical, mental health, and nutrition. People who are wealthy and well educated who have high paying jobs are much more likely to be healthy than are people who are living in a poorer circumstance. People who are poor have shorter life expectancies, are at greater risk for chronic illness such as diabetes, heart disease, and cancer, as well as for infectious diseases like tuberculosis. Children born into poor families are at much greater risk of dying during their first year of life. Most of the poor do not receive preventative medical or dental checkups. Hunger is related to class position and income inequality. Now the 2 images I'm going to show you here. The first is an investigative report looking at the access the rich and the poor have to doctors, nutritionally fresh food, and health and recreational facilities in relation to where they live. The report notes that the rich are proximity-wise closer to all the health-related resources than are the poor, who are from where they live. Okay, so your wealth seems to be connected to all the resources you need to stay healthy, whereas if you're poor, you live in areas where fresh food, doctors, and recreation you're not near. The second image I'm going to show you here is a report on where the poor live and where the pollution-producing industries are located, and interestingly enough, in Toronto, they are in the same place. Where the poor live and where the greater pollution industries are is one and the same. Now we'll turn to education. Educational opportunities and life chances are directly linked. The functionalists view education as the elevator to social mobility. Conflict theorists stress that schools are agencies for reproducing the capitalist class system and perpetuating inequality in society. If we go and look at crime and lack of safety as a consequence, although people from all class commit crimes, they commit different kinds of crime. Capitalism produces social inequities that contribute to criminality among people. Poverty and violence are also linked. So poverty in Canada, let's look at that. The official poverty line is based on what is considered to be the minimum amount of money required for a living at a subsistence level. Canada has no, and I repeat, Canada has no official definition of poverty. Therein lies part of the problem and why poverty exists. If you can't identify it, how do you expect you're going to create solutions to eradicate it? You can't eradicate what you don't identify. So there's no official way of measuring poverty and no official poverty line. The most accepted definition of poverty is a Stats Canada before tax low income cutoff. That's the income level at which a family may be in strained circumstances because it spends considerably more on the basic necessities of life, food, shelter, and clothing, than the average family. But that's not a specific number. This varies by family size and community size. According to the LICO measure, that's the low income cutoff, any individual or family that spends more than 70% of its income on the necessities of life, food, clothing, and shelter, is considered to be living in poverty. All right, so what does that mean? After calculating the costs of food, shelter, and clothing, there is only a fraction left for personal care, household needs, furniture, telephone, transportation, school supplies, healthcare. The list can go on and on. There is no money for entertainment, recreation, reading materials, insurance, or donations. When sociologists define poverty, they distinguish between absolute and relative poverty. Absolute poverty, the level of economic deprivation in which people do not have the means to secure those basic necessities of life, food, shelter, and clothing. They don't even have what they need to get that. Relative poverty, the level of economic deprivation in which people may be able to afford basic necessities, but they're still unable to maintain an average standard of living. So who are the poor? Poverty in Canada is not randomly distributed, but it's highly concentrated among certain groups of people: women, children, persons with disabilities, and Indigenous people. If we look at age, the poverty rate for children under the age of 18 is approximately 17%. More than 1.3 million Canadian children are living in poverty, and a huge number of children hover just above the official poverty line. That's the low income cutoff. We can consider gender. About 2/3 of all adults living in poverty in Canada are women. Women in all categories are at greater risk of poverty than men are. It's known as the feminization of poverty. The risk is particularly significant in single-parented families headed by women. All women are not equally susceptible to poverty. Many visible minority women may experience reshuffled poverty, a condition of deprivation that follows them regardless of the type of family in which they live. Multiple jeopardies. This refers to the even greater risk of poverty experienced by women who are immigrants, members of a visible minority, Indigenous, or who have disabilities. If we consider race, a disproportionate percentage of the impoverished in Canada are Indigenous persons and recent immigrants. Indigenous people are among the most severely disadvantaged. About 1/3 live in poverty. The median income for Indigenous persons is just over $29,000 as compared to the national average of $75,000. We can also look at disability as a major issue. Many persons with disability continue to be excluded from the workplace, not because of the disability itself, but because of the environmental barriers in the workplace. I'll get to that. I'm going to come back to this in a minute. Adults with disabilities have significantly lower incomes than Canadians without disabilities. Now, what's important about that statement I made just a minute ago, that they're excluded not because of disability, but because of the environmental barriers in the workplace, how the workplace doesn't invite or include people with disabilities. It was 23, I think, years ago, under the McGuinty government, Liberals in Ontario, that the Ontario Disability Act went through, which stated essentially that all businesses and public spaces need to be adapted for people with disabilities in 25 years. Well, we're 2 years away from that, and there's a lot of barriers still up. Businesses are waiting until the last minute to do anything. And if they can't, they're going to be arguing how they deserve some sort of compensation or support to have that extension. They've had 25 years to do it. The self-report median total income of working age persons with disabilities was slightly more than $20,000 a year. Now we're going to touch on some economic and structural sources of poverty. Poverty has both economic and structural sources. Economic ones. About 1/3 of low-income families have one parent working full-time. Minimum wage full-time jobs do not allow for the worker to keep a family of 4 above the official poverty line. Structurally, changes in our societies from industrial-based ones to information-based ones has introduced automation, and automation certainly has had a big impact. It's been the part of closure of many factories, the deindustrialization of North America. Now, the deindustrialization is where corporations have been divesting in Canada and millions have lost their jobs. In the emergence of what is termed job de-skilling is a reduction in the proficiency needed to perform specific tasks that lead to a corresponding reduction in the wages for that job. So the shift from manufacturing to service occupations has resulted in the loss of higher paying positions and other replacements of lower paying and less secure positions. Now lastly, we're going to explore the sociological perspective of social inequity. And we'll look at it from the different theorists. From the functionalists, social inequality is not only inevitable but necessary for the smooth functioning of society. Doesn't sound like you'd want to be on that end just for society to run smooth, that it's somehow a necessity. The Davis-Moore thesis is a definitive functionalist explanation for social inequality. And you'll see that on beside me there. All societies have important tasks that must be accomplished, and some positions are more important than others. The most important positions must be filled by the most qualified people. The positions that require talent that is scarce must be at the most highly rewarded. Those most highly rewarded should be functionally unique and on which people in other positions rely for expertise, direction, or financing. The Davis-Moore thesis assumes that social stratification results in what's called mediocrity, or the hierarchy in which all positions are rewarded based on people's, not mediocrity, meritocracy. Meritocracy is a hierarchy in which all positions are rewarded based on people's ability and their credentials. This thesis is critiqued on several levels. It includes that it seems to ignores inequities based on inherited wealth and the intergenerational family status. When we consider conflict, from a conflict perspective, people with economic and political power are able to shape and distribute the rewards, resources, privileges, and opportunities in society for their own benefit. Core values in Canada emphasize the importance of material possessions, hard work, individual initiative to get ahead, and the behavior that supports the existing social structure. Conflict theorists also note that laws and informal social norms support inequity in Canada. culture supports the capitalist social structure. The feminists, according to the feminist scholars, the quality of an individual's life experiences is a reflection of both class position and gender. The social inequalities within social class, gender is added to class to result in a double ghetto and a second shift. The evidence of this is that many women work in low-paying positions and their income on average is less than men's. Women, more than men, work the double shift or the second shift. And we talked about that earlier, where women are more likely than men to engage in family care, which is not remunerated. You don't get paid for looking after your family. When women become mothers, they often lose the accumulated wealth and experience that comes with being on the job continuously. Women, within any class, women are less advantaged than men. The cause of the inequity lie in the organization of capitalism itself. Now, the symbolic interactionists, they usually do not analyze larger structural factors that contribute to inequity and poverty. They're a micro as opposed to a macro theory. A few studies provide a rare insight into the social interactions between people from vastly divergent class locations. Studies by Domhoff, where wealthy businessmen are bound together by games and rituals, sharing meals and other activities. Another example of the micro perspective is the face-to-face interactions that are displayed is the differential behavior between non-equals. And it's known as the differential behavior is confirms the inequity in the relationship. The deferral is when, if I'm the lower man on the totem pole and my boss comes and gives me some feedback, I might bow my head or in some way acknowledge my inadequacies. That's differential behavior. When I acknowledge I am not worthy, And as much as you might say, well, that just doesn't happen, wait, it most certainly does. Research has found that the wealthy often demand deference from the lower class. And it won't be spelled out in so many words, but it might be the reason that someone in a lower class didn't get some kind of service because they didn't defer to the ruling class, as it were, or the owner. All right. There we be. The end of a semester. I hope everything went well. I hope you gained something from this class. And good luck in your future. I hope you're in another class of mine at some point in the future. And if I don't see you or hear of you again, good luck and much happiness in your future. Bye now.